Hi, welcome everyone. I'm going to invite you to get comfortable. This will be about an hour-long presentation, and we will introduce ourselves shortly. But for now, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to begin to share my screen with you all so we can get started.
Yeah, thank you for taking time to attend this presentation. What we're going to be doing is introducing what's called the Community Resiliency Model, or CRIM. It's a set of quick and easy practices that will help you better respond to and reduce the impact of stress and trauma on your daily lives. Well, what's the problem that we're trying to face or to address? The current challenges? Well, we're all familiar with burnout, with exhaustion. We know that we have traumatic, stressful experiences at work, but we also have them outside of work too, and they come to work with us. There's increasing isolation and loneliness in our country today. We have issues related to diversity, inclusion. We have a need for equity that has to be addressed, and that causes a lot of stress to a lot of people. And in addition, we have a shortage of counselors, so that we don't really have as many people as we might need to help us through these stressful times. And then we ourselves don't have enough time often to do the sorts of things that we might like to do. Well, what's this model that we're talking about? It's based on teaching and not counseling. So we emphasize that we are not counselors, we're teachers, guides, and this is not counseling. It's based on recognition of body sensations, not feelings or emotions. The point of that, if you're not inclined to get into feelings or emotions, or don't think you have time, you don't have to, at least to practice this model. It only requires you to characterize sensations as either pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant. Now, you can characterize them further if you wish, but that's all that's basically required. And it's going to teach us how to recognize how visceral sensations can interfere with our optimal decision-making and also our optimal sense of well-being. What we'll be teaching you is exercises that can be done in approximately 5 minutes. Now, you have to do them more than once, but they will help you in a short time to regain your composure and to regain optimal functioning. So what benefits do we think you're going to get from this? These are lofty goals, but we really think that you will get a greater sense of calmness and joy if you take up these practices. You'll be more in control of your reactions to stress rather than having the stress be in control of you. You'll be, because you are calmer and less likely to have your reactions to stress control you, you'll be an influence and an inspiration for positive change in your work community and in your home community. And so although these are lofty, we believe that they're attainable. And one of the themes that you will hear through this is, if the instinctual and emotional parts of our nervous systems are activated enough, they drown out the cognitive brain so that our decisions become increasingly irrational. We're literally out of our minds. Now, you could make a lot of commentary on modern America, but this is one of the themes that we're going to be talking about. Well, who are we? I'm David Lawson. I took training to be a CRM guide. I'm also a medical oncologist at Winship Cancer Institute of Emory University, and that's my email up there. Now turn to Sonali.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sonali Sadiki, and I am also a CRIM guide. CRIM stands for Community Resiliency Model. And I'm also a certified Imago communication coach, which is essentially a trauma-informed relationship building skills coaching that I offer to individuals. That's my contact information and my Instagram handle if you wanna be in touch with me. We're actually going to go ahead and dive in to your first practice that we want to introduce you to, which is actually called a grounding activity. So for this, I want to go ahead and invite you to get comfortable wherever you're seated, in your chair, in your couch, maybe in your bed, wherever or maybe you're sitting on the floor, wherever you're sitting. I want to invite you to go ahead and just sink into your seat, join along if you like. Of course, you can always pass as well, it's your choice. And if you're joining along, then invite you to maybe close your eyes if that feels okay with you today. And I invite you to begin to notice how your back is making contact with the chair, whatever it is that you're sitting on. And as you draw your attention to the chair, notice the parts of your body that's making contact with that surface, either on your backrest. Notice your back resting, your legs, your hips, notice them sinking into the cushion underneath you. Now notice your thighs, your legs, then your feet. Bring your awareness to your feet, making contact with the ground. Notice sensations that are more pleasant or neutral. Pleasant or neutral sensations within your own body. And if you notice any uncomfortable sensations, it's okay. I invite you to gently redirect your attention to the places that feel neutral or pleasant. Notice how you are being supported in this moment. Notice how you're being held up. Notice that you are safe in this moment. Your body is safe. And as you continue to feel and notice how you're being supported, notice the point of contact between your body and the surface underneath you. Begin to slowly scan your body as we begin to transition. Bring your attention to all the sensations that are pleasant, neutral, comfortable. And then as you're ready, taking your time, slowly begin to open your eyes and come back into the Zoom presentation. So that was a grounding practice. I hope that you're feeling a slight shift, perhaps, maybe, in how you're feeling, maybe how you were feeling before versus how you're feeling now. Maybe you feel a little bit more dropped into your body. Maybe you feel a little bit more connected to your body. Maybe not, or maybe you just feel a little bit slowed down or not. But our hope is that it has a grounding effect, that you are feeling a little bit more dropped in and a little bit like slowed down. And that's the point of grounding, this actual practice. You can ground with anything, really, any surface. So it could be where you're standing against the wall, like in this picture, or you can ground as you're walking, wherever you're walking, lying on the grass or in the bed, sitting in a chair, or even floating in the water, right? You could also be grounding by holding something in your hand or feeling something like a rock. In this case, there's a person's touching the tree. So anything that's making contact with your body, you can bring your attention there and use that contact, that place of contact, to ground your energies.
So the origins of this community resiliency model are in studies of trauma. Basically, the Trauma Resource Institute is a parent organization, if you will. The person who has done most of this work, her name is there, Elaine Miller-Karras. But what people observed in this Trauma Resource Institute is when they would respond to hurricanes, other natural disasters, they would find that the people that they were going to help were, of course, in a state of, as we might say, shock, varying degrees. But they also began to notice that their volunteers were also very deeply affected by what they saw and by what they experienced. Some of this is vicarious trauma, as we say, but a lot of it was impairing their ability to help, to do the things that they wanted to do. And they realized they didn't have a lot of time. Volunteers might come from different backgrounds, might have different experiences with different ways of meditation or yoga or other activities that they might find to help them. But they needed something to do that they could do quickly. And that's where these exercises came. Now, these exercises represent a focus on biology as compared to mental weakness. And that's an important thing to stress. I think we've all experienced people who would want to say that someone who was not responding in the way we might like is weak or off or something derogatory like that. But this focus is really more on the biology of the human nervous system. I mean, we see that the body has got a brain, of course, but it has lots of other things as well. And there are very common human reactions to stressful or traumatic events that can affect not just your mind, but also your body and your spirit. We have here, as we know, our heart can pound, our stomach can churn, our skin can crawl, our lungs will feel short of breath as we breathe more deeply or more shallowly. Our eyes will sometimes see red or things of that sort. So what this CRIM method is doing is to help people shift the emphasis from human weakness or human pathology to simple biology. This not only makes things quicker, as it were, but it makes them more accessible to people who are not psychologically oriented or psychologically trained. Another way of looking at this perspective shift is in my youth, certainly, the conventional knowledge was that people are bad. They need to be punished. We don't need to be making excuses for them, or they just don't care. And then we got more enlightened, as it were, and began to realize that often what's happening is people are suffering, that they don't need us to put them down. They need an effective intervention, which often meant helping them in some way, that people may just not know how to do things that they need to do, and that people are often impacted by past traumas, things that happened to them as children, and they bring that baggage with them. The new perspective, the resiliency model, as it were, it emphasizes that people are resilient. We are a resilient species. We're all descended from people who went through things that we can hardly imagine. And we have their resilience in our DNA. We begin to realize that people need our compassion as they try to learn new skills. We also realize that anybody, or most anybody, can learn these self-regulation skills, and that these skills are based on science. They're not just made up. And that we need to learn how these skills of well-being can reduce suffering, not just in the acute setting, but also the minor things or more minor things that happen to us in life. So the bottom line of this perspective shift is on the bottom line. It has gone from what is wrong with you to what happened to you to now an emphasis on what is right with you. What are your strengths? How did you get this far? How are you coping with what's going on with you right now?
So the other thing that we are learning and that we know about just humanness and our capacity, our ability to be resilient, is that we know that whatever adversity that we may have had in the past, or whatever adversity that we may be dealing with today, that it doesn't have to dictate our destiny, our future, that we can actually take charge and we can make choices today that can actually direct and change our destiny, right? Our pathway. And this can be done. And what CREM, right, the community resiliency model, and all these different practices that we're going to be sharing with you in this presentation, is that all of this can be done by first stabilizing our nervous system. So the question is, well, what if we all can learn to stabilize our nervous system? Because it's when we can learn how to stabilize our nervous system, then we can really see that whatever happened to us in the past, it doesn't have to keep happening to us in the future. Like, we can actually, by stabilizing our nervous system, we can actually change our perspective in and around and out of situations that we perceive as dangerous or painful or suffering. So the resiliency informed self-care is essentially about learning skills where we can become more attuned, right, and are able to use these skills for self-care. So as individuals, as we become more resilient, our families and communities become more resilient, then we feel more in charge, we feel more in control, we feel more able to handle the stresses of life and whatever it is that we might be suffering or that we have suffered in the past even. So the first thing that we actually say is that these skills must first be practiced and learned by our own self. Okay, so it's kind of like in the airplane, right? If something's happening in the airplane and the masks come down, we are told to first put on the mask for ourselves so that we can then be better positioned to then take care of somebody else. If we're already having a hard time breathing and we're trying to help somebody else, then we might actually lose out on time, and there might be something happening to us. So we first take care of ourselves and build up our resiliency, and we're better positioned to be able to support another. So what is the resilient zone? To understand, when we say resilient, we're talking about something very specific, and we are talking about something that's very connected to the nervous system. And I'm going to go and explain that to you. Like, what is that? What is it that we're actually referring to when we say resilient? We are referring to something what we call the resilient zone. It's a state of well-being in the mind, the body, the spirit. Right? It's a state of well-being. It's a state where we feel like we're in charge of our emotions. We're in charge of our nervous system, our nerves, if you will. We feel like we're able to handle the stresses of life. So if we get annoyed or even angry at something, we don't feel like we're going to lose our head and flip out. Or if we're feeling sad about something, and kind of blue, we don't feel like we're going to be washed away by the river of sorrows. So we're still intact, and that's kind of what we're referring to when we say being in the resilient zone. And here you see little wavy line, and what this wavy line is essentially describing is that in a given day, for example, we all have ups and downs in a given day. There's good news we hear, there's not so good news we hear. We may hear even something that is a stressful experience that we might be having. But if we're in our resilient zone, we're able to handle it. We're able to make choices that are aligned with our best self. Like, we're making choices according to what we know is how we want to be showing up in a stressful situation. It's aligned with that vision, right? And when we're behaving in that way, we're behaving within and still in our in our well behavior, and that means we're in our resilient zone. However,
life has a way of coming at us sometime and knocking us out of that resilient zone. It's illustrated in this particular drawing by a lightning bolt. And we'll talk later, it doesn't have to be a lightning bolt. It could be a lot of things that just happen over time. But when these things happen, these traumatic or stressful events or triggers happen, we can get knocked out of the zone, and we can get knocked into what's called a high zone. This is where people tend to be angry, they tend to be irritable, they tend to be edgy, if you will. They may have anger outbursts at times. And then if they go into the low zone, you have depression, sadness, isolation, exhaustion, these sorts of things. Now, we mentioned burnout earlier. Burnout can be either low, exhausted, isolated, or it can be high with angry outbursts. There are two problems with getting knocked out of the zone. One is if you get stuck. And you may get stuck in a high zone, you may get stuck in the low zone, you may get stuck just vacillating between the two. But it's a problem when you get stuck in one of these zones. The other problem is what you do or what you say while you're in one of these high zone or low zone situations. And that's where we want, of course, to be on our guard, because we may say and do things that we profoundly regret. So what do we mean then by trauma and stress? We've talked about hurricanes and earthquakes and things of that sort, and certainly that's a form of trauma, but we increasingly recognize that trauma can be too much or too little for too long. in the terms of stress. We have a picture here. It's of a father berating his daughter. It could be a supervisor berating an employee. It could be a customer or client or patient berating someone who's trying to help them. It could be a lot of things. But if you get that sort of treatment over long enough, it can cause your nervous system to become dysregulated, as you might imagine. It can cause you to get stuck in either the high zone or the low zone. Another thing to think about is perception really is key. What may look like not much to me or to someone else may in fact be a lot to the person who is going through it. Similarly, we have here the effects of that kind of long-term stress, as it were, someone who's withdrawn, who's clearly dysregulated. And again, perception is key. And then we have another slide basically showing the same thing. This poor little boy just feels like lightning bolts are coming at him from every place. And then here we have Charlie Brown. And Charlie Brown goes sometimes from the high zone, sometimes to the low zone. My recollection, he was more often in the low zone. But after these traumatic and stressful events, some people just get stuck. Some in the high zone, some in the low zone, some go back and forth. And even after the trauma and the stress is over, you can sometimes see people who remain stuck in these zones. And remember again, perception is key. And also remember that when you're in the high zone or the low zone, you will not be thinking your best. You will not be as rational and as able to concentrate as you would like to be.
Thank you. Yes. When we are bumped out of our zone, either high or low, oftentimes we find ourselves in a situation, first of all, it feels really unpleasant. It's not how we want to be feeling. And we don't oftentimes behave, our best. We don't oftentimes make the best decisions. And sometimes a lot of the decisions that we end up regretting, we usually regret it because we've actually been bumped up or bumped low, and we're not just making clear decision. And that's why it matters. It so matters that we be able to get back into our resilient zone as soon as possible, because that's where we feel the best, of course. That's when we feel most connected, most aligned. And it's also just where we make our best decisions. We behave the best with others as well. And we treat ourselves better when we're in our resilient zone. The other thing to keep in mind, we're going to be sharing a bit of as you have noticed, we're already sharing a lot of neuroscience with you, how the nervous system functions. Now I want to share with you a little bit about mirror neurons. So mirror neurons, it's really important to understand. We all have them. It's part of being human. It's a part of our brain function. And it's really fascinating how this happens. We have, as human beings, we mirror each other's actions in our own behavior. When we are in our resilient zone, it is mirrored by those around us. So what does this mean? It means that if we are in our resilient zone, we have the ability to influence and inspire others in a very unconscious, kind of like automatic kind of a way, because they have mirror neurons. So they can pick up on our behavior and how we're showing up. And because of their mirror neurons, they can adapt some of our way of being, and vice versa, right? And it's just what happens, so it's kind of like, have you ever been engaging or interacting with somebody and their energy gets really excited. And so you kind of feel excited too, you know, or you're talking to somebody and they're feeling really sad and blue. And then, you know, you feel some of that sadness too. It's because of mirror neurons that are constantly functioning in our brains. Let's see. I think that's all I wanted. Okay, yes. So it's really important. The other part of our neurology is that we have the ability to track our nervous system. Now, this ability is like any other ability, any other skill. The more you practice it, the better you become at it. Now, here's what's happening. We as people, really globally, we're usually not taught to pay attention to our nervous system. And so most of us are growing up as adults, and we grew up as kids not knowing how to pay attention to our nervous system, which means how to track what's happening in our nervous system. And this is exactly the skill that we want you all to learn how to do very well. We want you to know how to track your nervous system today, starting today. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, this is one of the most fundamental skills of resiliency, developing your resilient skills and getting yourself back into your resilient zone. So take it away.
What does tracking mean, actually? It's learning how to identify and pay attention to sensations that you may have. It's the foundation. And the bottom line, the basic thing we need to be able to do is to tell if the sensations we're having are sensations of distress or upset, or if they are sensations of balance and well-being. And as we will discuss as we go forward, learning to pay more attention to the sensations of well-being is really key to helping you feel better in mind, body, and spirit. It's the difference between the garden full of weeds and the garden with lots of beautiful flowers and fresh vegetables. So when we talk about tracking, we're talking about tracking sensations. Now, before we showed the picture of different parts of the body, and we know you can have the sensation of your stomach churning or your skin crawling or your heart pounding or your respirations being either too deep or too shallow or too fast or too slow, perhaps. But there's some other sensation words that we might pay attention to too, like muscles may be tight, loose, calm. We may feel cold, we may feel hot, we may not feel particularly either one. We may feel vibration, shaking, twitching, trembling. This can be either quick or slow, but part of the thing as we're dealing with these sensations is we want to learn these words, but remember what we're mostly interested in is, can you identify what's pleasant, neutral, and what's unpleasant? So as we have looked at this has got feelings on it, but it's just to show that when you talk to people and ask them, well, where do you feel things when you're angry, or where do you feel things when you're sad? Pretty much across cultures, across genders, and other any other category that you want to think of putting human beings into, we all tend to not experience things just in our minds. We experience them throughout our bodies. And it's these sensations that we want you to pay attention to. Now, among these sensations, if you will, or instinctual behaviors are what are called survival reactions. Now, fight and flight is the one that we're most commonly hear about, but there's also freeze. And recently people are noticing tend and befriend. Tend and befriend is exemplified by the person who lives with another person who is abusive. And particularly if that's a child living with an abusive parent, that child may learn to do a lot of things to take care of that abusive person in order that the abuse not start. Now, it's not that they really like them all that much necessarily, but the behaviors are designed to protect against abuse. Now, if we look at survival reactions, we mentioned about tend and befriend. We mentioned about fight, flight, and freeze, but important to remember, they are automatic. They're instinctual. They are survival responses. Even the tend and befriend, people often don't make a rational decision to do that. They just do it because it's their instinctive way to survive. The other thing to remember about these survival responses is if the environment is seen to be threatening, a person may live in a constant state of distress, such that it doesn't really take much to put them into whatever their survival response of that moment may be. Important to think about the fact that a person can be challenged can be triggered into these responses by a challenging coworker, or a challenging supervisor, or a challenging family member, or client, or patient, or customer. Situations or individuals that remind us of people who harmed us, remind us of that bully in third grade. And it may just come without any warning. All of a sudden, you're reminded of something that happened a long time ago. Witnessing the continued suffering of others is a really hard thing. And we all in healthcare do that. And witnessing injustices toward others, which most of us see, unfortunately, as we go through our lives. All these things can trigger our survival responses, and it's important that we recognize that.
And that's why the practice of tracking becomes really important and critical, because if we learn how to track our nervous system, we have a better sense of picking up when our flight, freeze, and collapse, tend and befriend reactions might be triggered. Because when those instinctual, those automatic survival reactions get triggered, our body is actually responding to it. Our biology is actually responding to it. And that is exactly what tracking helps us to track, right? And we may not emotionally be conscious because everything's those kind of reactions are happening on an instinctual level. However, if we learn how to track our biology, then we'll at least be able to then notice, oh, my heartbeat is getting faster. I'm starting to sweat, or, oh gosh, like I'm starting to feel tight and tense, like I'm getting into a fight mode. So these are the biological responses of when our fight and flight freeze response kind of gets triggered. So that's why we say we want to become really good at tracking, because that is something that we can pay attention to, which will help us to give us a layer of conscious self-awareness. Okay, so one of the best ways to learn to stabilize the nervous system is through identifying your body-based sensations, like the ones that Dr. Lawson talked about a bit earlier, like starting to discern sensations of calmness, sensations of relaxation versus sensations of stress, right? And sensations of fight, flight, freeze response. So that's the whole point. We are trying to get really good at identifying sensations happening inside the body, and that's essentially tracking. That's the practice. That's the skill. And the more we do that, the better we are able to read our nervous system. And that is the fundamental practice here. So let's go ahead. I think I already shared all this with you all. So when we're able to read our nervous system, guess what? It enhances our ability to make choices, conscious choices, rather than instinctual, automatic, unconscious choices, right? And to learn to read our nervous system is so that we can tell the difference between sensations of distress, sensations of well-being, ultimately. So let's go ahead and get into it. I want to invite you to join along if you like, or you can, of course, just watch the presentation if you like. But we're going to go ahead and get into an actual tracking practice. And I'm going to move you through and guide you through that. So for now, I invite you to get comfortable again. Kind of shift and move, get into your wherever you're seated. Maybe close your eyes if that helps you to pay attention better to what's happening inside. And as you do this, I invite you to tune in to your body. Tune in to perhaps your breath cycle. Notice the pace of your breathing. Notice your inhalation and your exhalation. Also notice the rate of your heartbeat. Just simply register. Is it beating at your normal pace? Is it beating slower, faster? And also notice your muscle tone. Just how is your body feeling? Places that feel open and relaxed. Maybe there's places that feel tight, constricted. Just notice. So ask yourself, what do you notice happening inside? And as you begin to notice, invite you to notice what feels pleasant or neutral. Begin to notice what also feels unpleasant. Begin to notice the different places in your body that feel pleasant, neutral, unpleasant. And invite you, if you notice anything that feels unpleasant or uncomfortable, then invite you to begin to redirect your attention to something that feels pleasant or more comfortable or neutral. And stay there for a moment. And then when I invite you to continue to notice what you feel, and slowly begin to get ready to transition. And when you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes if they're still closed and come back to your presentation. So what you just did was tracking. And now I want to introduce you to a third practice called resourcing. So resourcing is essentially a practice that involves you thinking about something that brings you joy, something that makes you feel calm, or something that makes you feel strong or confident in your life. So it could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a hobby, an activity. It could be something that you believe in, something that, something you have faith in. And it could also be just an inner quality, something like an inner strength, right? It could be a emotional strength. It could be a physical strength. It could be, your strong legs, your arms. So anything like that. It could also be something that's imagined. So like you're flying on a red carpet through the sky, or a unicorn, like whatever makes you feel happy and joyful inside when you think about it. So those are categories of different resources. It could also be a pet. So for this next practice, I want to invite you to come up with something that's a resource to you, something that makes you feel good inside. And just think about that one thing. And then when you're ready, I want to invite you to, again, maybe close your eyes and join along if you like. Again, you can pass if you like. And if you're joining along, then I invite you to, again, to get comfortable in your seat. And think about that one resource. Just choose one. And then invite you to engage with this resource in your mind, in your own imagination. See yourself interacting or engaging with this resource. See yourself enjoying interacting with this resource. What all do you enjoy about this resource? Why? And as you think about this resource, continue to think about this resource, I invite you to also become a bit aware of what's happening inside your body simultaneously. Notice what's happening inside. Notice sensations of your body. Notice if there's been any changes or shifts in what you are sensing in your body or not. Notice if there's any pleasant or neutral sensations connected to your resource. If you notice anything unpleasant coming up, it's okay. Then I invite you to gently redirect your attention to your resource, to the pleasant or neutral sensations that might be happening inside. continue to feel the sensations that feel pleasant or neutral. As much as possible. And notice how your breathing is responding. Notice how your heartbeat is responding. Notice how your muscle tone is responding. I want to invite you to continue to feel and notice as we begin to transition. Invite you to continue to feel the pleasant or neutral sensations. And then when you're ready, slowly begin to transition as you open your eyes again and return to the presentation. Okay. So what you just did was called resourcing. And it's, as you can see, it's still paired in with tracking. So they kind of go hand in hand. So resourcing builds a sense of internal strength and enhances resiliency and reinforces your own abilities and your capacities. I hope that when you did that, you were able to notice some shifts. Perhaps you felt a little bit more relaxed, maybe a little bit more dropped in, and maybe a greater sense of joy, hopefully. These sensations are connected to you resourcing by you thinking of your resource. And it's really to reinforce the experience of well-being to help you to stabilize your nervous system, ultimately. So a person can experience new hope, that there are other sensations that can help bring them back into their resilience zone. One thing I wanted to say is that the more we practice this, the tracking and the resourcing, because of how our neurology is designed, the more you practice that, just like anything else in life, the more you practice that, the more it becomes available to you, the more you experience it. And this is happening in the neuroscience world. We have a phrase that we say, where attention goes, energy flows. What you focus on, you get, right? And so because you're focusing on a resource that makes you feel good and joyful and confident and calm inside, the more you focus on that, the more your brain will develop neural pathways to support that. And that's ultimately the intention. That is the ultimate intention behind all of these practices, is that you are enhancing, increasing, and reinforcing the parts of your brain that actually help you to stabilize your nervous system by bringing you more joy and calmness. It's really that simple. So let's move on.
Well, how then can you use this for self-care? We've been mostly talking about somewhat stressful or traumatic situations and how these can be used as a kind of first aid, if you will, to help you through a particular difficulty. But they actually can be included into your life in ways that will be helpful to you. We all know, and we have all been ourselves in these somewhat narrow, resilient zones. We know people who are there more than others, for instance. And, you know, when you're in that narrow zone, it doesn't take much to bump you into either the low or the high zone. Not a very comfortable way to be, nor a very comfortable situation to live with or to work with either. Now, the teaching that the exercises that we've been talking about can actually help you widen your resilience zone. Now, they won't do it necessarily the first time, but if you incorporate them into your life, even short bursts at a time, they can help you widen that resilience zone. And that's part of what we want to leave you with. I mean, what are you already doing to widen your resilience zone? Well, you probably are doing some things, hobbies, people, some things that you rely on to get you through the day. But if you found these particular skills helpful, how could you weave them into your routine? What did you find most helpful? And what specifically can you do to embark on a better self-care plan than you have if you think yours needs improvement, and you may not? One thing that you can do is to write a statement of encouragement to yourself and say, all right, I'm going to do this and I can do it, etc. Write down your encouragement and then read your statement of encouragement to yourself. Read it to yourself. And notice as you read that statement of encouragement, what's happening inside your body. Like as not, there will be more neutral or pleasant sensations than unpleasant. So draw your attention to these. And new things may come up, but as positive things come up, draw your attention to those. Over time, it is our belief that your resilient zone does become wider as you do these exercises. As Sonali said, if you do things, if any exercise, any practice, as you do it over and over, it becomes more available to you. You become more adept at it. And so that perhaps when the next lightning bolt strikes, you're a little better able to contend with that. So this is just a way, if you like it, of keeping up with how you're doing. If you want to, just how often are you in your resilience zone? Never. I hope that's not the case, but there are days. And then all the time certainly is a goal, but most of us just have to work toward that goal.
Exactly. So one last thing I wanted to say is that when we are tracking, when you are tracking, when you are resourcing, and when you are grounding, these three practices really can be done in a matter of anywhere between a minute to 5 minutes is enough. And we actually invite you to practice them and sprinkle them throughout the day, right? Maybe you do a resourcing, tracking first thing in the morning when you wake up, and you just begin the day from resourcing, right? And then maybe in between transitions is another great time. So for example, you just when we began driving again, and so you come and you just parked your car at your destination at work or wherever you're going, and before you get out of the car, maybe you do another resourcing, right? And maybe you do it during lunch break, or maybe you do one after work, or maybe in between, whatever you have to do in transitions, right? Maybe you do some resourcing and tracking and grounding before you go to sleep. So I usually say sprinkle them throughout the day, maybe once here, twice there, 5 times throughout the day, whatever works for you. You get to determine that. I find that a lot of people, and there's been a lot of research, some research done. What we found is that when people start practicing this for about 12 weeks, or was it 6 weeks? I think it was 12 weeks. Within 12 weeks, they noticed a huge difference in their ability to feel resilient and in their zone and be more connected to their best self. And that the stresses of life that happens that can usually throw them off it usually doesn't. They feel a greater sense of just groundedness and more centered. And that is what we're noticing with the research that's been done around all of these practices and the impact that it has on our nervous system. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and begin to wrap this up. So you can connect with the Trauma Resource Institute. That is the organization founded by our teacher, Elaine Miller-Carras. And this is their social media handles. You can also find an app in the App Store called iChill. And it's a great little app. They're in the process of updating it, but you can actually be grounded because there's a grounding activity. So it'll guide you through a grounding. It also explains to you what the resilience zone is, what these skills are. And so you can just something interactive, something to support you while you're up there in life. Another resource that you can get into if you really want to get into like some of the science behind this and how it's been used across the world and across multiple different communities, and you want to learn more about Elaine's work around this, then we recommend this book. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Building Resilience to Trauma. And I think that brings us to our conclusion for our presentation. So let me stop sharing the screen.
Yes. Thank you all. Thank you all for attending.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. It's been lovely. Again, if you have any questions or you want to be in touch with me, my name is Sonali, and you can scroll back up on the presentation to get our contact information. And we wish you well. We wish you much resilience and enjoy these practices. They're super easy, super simple. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.